book, a lie, in a world that changed forever. Imagine living in a world where a single book could turn your neighbor, your friend, and even your own family against you. My name is Gary Watson, and this is a new podcast series on my YouTube channel, The Geezerville Chronicles. In each episode, we trace a single lie or a dangerous story across centuries to see what it reveals about truth, power, and the challenges we face now. In episode 7, which aired on September 9th, we began to explore why some people kneel and others stand firm in the face of power. We learned how one woman, Coretta Scott King, prevented the end to the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama by standing her ground. It wasn't just courage. It was something else, something much deeper. Coretta refused to be dehumanized. She held on to her notion of what was right and wrong and drew strength from that conviction. She applied skills learned through education to imagine and to tell a story and find the words to be able to express that story to others. Coretta told the story of what freedom might look like, and those that followed her believed in that story. But there's more. So now let's dive in to episode 8, More Than Just a Widow. When most Americans think about Coretta Scott King, they think of her as Martin Luther King Jr.'s widow. They picture her as a graceful figure, someone who carried the image and the beliefs of Martin Luther King into the future. But Coretta was never just a widow. She was never just a wife. She left us with a legacy that deserves to be remembered. She led because she believed, in my view, in 5 key principles. And I'm going to take a moment to go through each one as a pillar that really describes who this woman was. She believed in dignity, the belief that every human being has worth. She refused to accept the lie that skin color determined human value. She believed in justice, the conviction that there was a higher moral law that endures beyond any court or Congress or decree. She believed in solidarity, the strength found in community, proving no one stands alone when truth is at stake. She had vision, the courage to imagine a different world where freedom was more than an idea. And 5, she had conviction, the resolve to endure threats, cling to the truth, and remain unbroken when silence would be safer. And these principles were forged in Coretta long before she ever met Martin. In January 1956, right in the midst of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, Coretta's phone was ringing off the hook, and there were threats, constant threats against her life and family and property. And she had this ability to respond with a bit of dark humor, which I found rather interesting, an interesting aspect of her personality. She would say something like, Martin is asleep right now, so if you would leave your name and number, he told me that anybody called with a threat that he would return that call in the next morning. So she had that spark. And Coretta once said, she said, during the bus boycott, I was tested by fire, and I found I became stronger in a crisis. Now, I've heard that sentiment expressed numerous times by leaders. But her strength really didn't start there in Montgomery. She was tested by fire and stood, but her strength began in Marion, Alabama. And it started there because her father owned a business in the town and became rather successful. And as a result of his success and the fact that he was black, his property and store were burnt to the ground. And that not only created a spark at the time, but it created the fire in her, because later, when she went to Antioch to attend college, she joined the NAACP, civil rights organizations, political movement. She became involved in the events of her time way before Martin did, and after Martin as well. Even before marriage, Coretta fought convention. When they wed, she refused to say, "I obey," to Martin. And at that time, that was a big deal. And she kept her name, Coretta Scott King, and never allowed herself to be referred to as Mrs. Martin Luther King. And yet for decades, she was portrayed that way. There was a 2018 article that was written by Jean Theo Harris, and it made that point. She said in her article, she quoted Coretta, and Coretta said, "I am made to sound like an attachment to a vacuum cleaner." That's what she told the reporter, and the link is below in the summary of this video. But she was never just a wife, never just a widow. Yet at her funeral in 2006, there was an effort by the leaders during that ceremony to just praise Coretta's beauty and her obedience. People like Harry Belafonte were excluded because they would remind the audience of Coretta's radical side, the side that made her the advocate she was. I remember reading in the article I referred to earlier that she sent Rosa Parks a letter about a woman activist. And on that magazine article, Coretta wrote to Rosa Parks, she said, "To Miss Rosa Parks, with love, respect, and deep appreciation." And she signed it. So you know what? I think it's time we return the favor. We remember Coretta for the leader, for the woman she was, for the activist she was, and for her courage to stand up against power on behalf of freedom, on behalf of human dignity, on behalf of social justice. That's what we ought to remember when we think about Coretta's legacy. She was someone who didn't run away from the bomb. She stood there, and she stood defiant, and she educated people about the reason for the movement as well as how to make the movement. And she was a voice that never stopped demanding justice. And not just for Black people, for all people. And that's what we should take away from Loretta, and why she was included in my examples of women who stood strong against power. So I'm going to leave you with this simple notion. When we hear the stories of the people in our history that we admire, it's important to really understand the true nature of the contributions that they make, and to honor them, and to accept the echoes that they send forward to the rest of us as we try and live our lives day to day. You know, I was reminded recently in doing an article on leadership, I remember reading that General Robert E. Lee has to date about 230 statues or commemoratives to his name, spread all over the country. A good number of them are in the South. They're statues, they're road signs, they're schools, whatever, that put his name out there. Now, I don't know if there are any such accolades that society has chosen to place on Coretta Scott King. But I find that grossly unjust, because in General Robert E. Lee, we have the epitome of what leadership isn't. It isn't about people who dehumanize other people. You know, Robert E. Lee was somebody that brutalized the slaves that he owned. He not only brutalized them, and we know this not from just recorded history, but from testimony by people that were on his plantations. I remember there was a man one time that told that as he watched his wife being whipped on the ground, lying prone, being lashed 50 times. And after that, Robert E. Lee commanded that brine be poured on to the woman's back as part of the torture. And I, for the life of me, can't understand why Robert E. Lee's echo resulted in statues across this nation to a general who was anything but a leader. And I'll leave you with that until next time.